So tonight's presentation, Medicaid in Kentucky, you do have some contact information there. I'll share that with us again and again. I want you to be able to get as much out of this as possible. So welcome. Thank you for giving up a Tuesday night. I am Scott Collins, an elder law attorney in Richmond, Kentucky. If you have met me before, fantastic. Thank you for showing up again. If you've never met me at all, the good news is I'm going to treat you all the same tonight. I'm always concerned about client confidentiality. So if you are someone that has visited the firm or I know personally, I'm going to treat everybody like a stranger. And that way I don't tip anybody off that you and I are besties or anything like that. This is Kentucky information. Medicaid is the focus of what we're talking about tonight. And Medicaid in Kentucky, different than Medicaid in Tennessee. It's very different than Medicaid in Indiana and Ohio. Every state is different, and there are some very peculiar things about all the surrounding states and Kentucky. And in fact, there are some changes coming because of what the president has placed in his big, beautiful bill. They're not anything for us to worry about. I'll do some dedicated webinars on that so we can see those changes coming, but they're not going to come until late into 2026. So this is 2025 information for Kentucky residents, people that are dealing with Medicaid in Kentucky. However, if you need information from another state or referral in another state, I'm very well connected across the nation. So please write me and I will do my best to connect you with somebody that is skilled and reputable in the area of Medicaid law. This is not something to dabble in. I know a lot of attorneys that try to, but as one attorney in London told me 2 weeks ago, they know just enough to be dangerous usually. So seek an elder law attorney and ask specifically, do they specialize in just that one area? Because if they do a whole lot of things, they won't be competent in it. Another thing, by way of introduction, is well, I'm not the beauty nor the brains behind the operation. I am the one with the experience and the specialization, but I have hand trained everybody on my staff, and they really are more skilled in some areas than I am. So you get the experience and the value of a whole team of people. So you can see this is the team there and the kinds of things we do inside the firm located here in Richmond, Kentucky. A little bit about my background. I am former military. I also spent nearly 2 decades as a Protestant minister in many churches from New England all the way to West Texas. So I dealt a lot with death and dying and family dynamics like that, hospitalization, family counseling. So I use a lot of that I've learned over the 35 years, help my clients. But I've also got a passion for historic preservation. And you can see a couple of houses there that we have here in Richmond. In fact, I have 6 houses, historic homes in Richmond/Madison County. And I try to open those up as frequently as possible for historic tours. So if that's something you're interested in, you can contact us through the same email. Okay, got it all said. Let's get on to this. Why all the fuss about Medicaid? Because if you know anything about me, you're talking about it all the time. And I didn't understand this when I first started practicing law, but the more I've gotten into it, the more I've become really set on fire by it. Because the likelihood of every one of us on the call, 70% of us are going to need this care at some point. Most of us think that we're going to have some sort of peaceful pass away in my bed at night, and that does happen. But for 7 out of 10 individuals, we're going to need long-term care before we pass away. And the current price tag on that is really astronomical. It's about $110,000 a year on average in Kentucky. And the average person needs about 3.5 years worth of care. So if you're fortunate enough to still be married and you do 7 out of 10 times two, it's not a 50-50 split, like one might need it, the other one won't. There's a high likelihood both in a couple's relationship would need it. So now you're talking about $700,000 worth of care that could be needed. And the fact is, with the aging population, as the baby boom continues to roll through at retirement, there are more and more people that turn 65 and older every day, and this need continues to grow. And the care industry isn't keeping up with that. In fact, most counties have less than one long-term care bed available for the population in that segment. So for all people age 65 and older, for instance, there's only one bed for every 100 of those individuals. That's a care crisis. And oftentimes money talks, and I think the industry is going to have to respond, but it's a concern to be looking forward to. So since the cost is running upward, on average, it's above $9,200 per month. There's a lot of things to worry about. Now, I'm hoping that you've got enough to pay for some of your care. Maybe you have enough to pay for all of your care. The problem with that is once the money runs out, the surviving spouse may not have the money. And beyond that, there are lots of reasons you've worked and saved and invested over your life. It wasn't necessarily just to pass it off to a care facility. It's to do other things for the survivors in your family and pass it on to children or grandchildren, or perhaps do some sort of giving to, philanthropic kinds of concerns. Just lots of things to do with our money, and there are wise paths to take. So, barriers to getting Medicaid coverage for long term care um, count both income and assets. Should put on this list. The knowledge is a real barrier because most of the time you're told, well, you make too much to qualify, or you have to pay privately for a period of time. They're all myths that need to be overturned. A lot of times, especially general practice attorneys will describe giving things away to protect them, but gifting creates a penalty. Most of us think, well, the only gifting is okay. There's just the tax consequence of the annual gift tax exclusion of 19,000. No, that's different. That's tax law. It has nothing to do with Medicaid law. So all of that's a concern. Then, if that weren't enough, there is a thing called a state recovery, so that even if you rely upon Medicaid benefits to pay for that $110,000 a year, Medicaid puts liens upon the estate to pay themselves back. It is the only governmental program that we have in the United States where they seek a reimbursement from the citizens, which is crazy because you paid into the system. Medicare, Medicaid funded by the exact same payroll deduction. But if you need it for a healthcare expense that affects almost every single American, they're going to pull it back and try to repay themselves. I got a better idea. How about they balance the budget and figure out how to fund things the correct way? So I really am concerned about this, and I want to protect people more than I want to protect the system. The system needs to get to work on itself. So those are some of the reasons for the fuss. Like I said, it's not just long-term care. Usually what happens for most of us is we experience a graduated need. We start out usually with some in-home care. Perhaps we're fortunate enough to have some friends or family or other agencies that'll provide support while we're still in the home. But eventually that becomes impractical for many of us. And so then we move to assisted living. There are some places where you have a minimal cost of about $2,500. Most of them start at around $3,500 to $4,000 a month right now. Then if you go to a personal care facility where there is a measure of medical treatment provided, it might be just medication disbursement or something like that. Those begin to run then in the $35,000 to $6,000 range. But what we traditionally think of as skilled care, that runs in that range of around $6,000 to $11,000 per month. And like I said, on average in the state right now, it's $9,250. So if you just do the math on that, we get up to these high numbers that are closer to 300,000 and above for the average person. Now, on top of that, I want to add a note about Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's rates are increasing, and they're projected to increase again decade after decade for the next 25 years or so. The reason Alzheimer's changes this is primary concerns. First off, it extends the length of time you need care, because although our mind becomes incapable of being clear and focused and maintaining competency, our body is usually very strong, and so you can live quite a long time. The average person needs care 3, average Alzheimer's person needs care for about 5. And memory care is harder to find for an Alzheimer's patient. because there's a need for a higher degree of supervision. There's often a flight risk, so you have to have higher securities in place, and that's not what the typical facility is willing to pay for. And the big, beautiful bill completely dispensed with the federal standards that had been in place, that there had to be a specific staff to patient ratio. And the president has said, no, you don't have to do that. And now nursing home owners are able to staff on a shoestring. It's not been good for the past few years since COVID, where we couldn't find enough workers in the healthcare industries. And now they don't even have a requirement. So I'm really concerned about that part. I'm not concerned about frugality in our government. I think that's a bonus. What I am concerned about is businesses not having a standard by which they have to deliver adequate care. So I'm concerned about all of this. So those two things in the way of Alzheimer's. I want a little statistic chart next to show you how that is increasing, but it's a significant increase in how many of us are beginning to face that. So if we're 7 out of 10 needing care, and Alzheimer's is increasing as well in its frequency among us, what are your options? You can always pay privately. There is long-term care insurance, but it's finding less and less to be an affordable option for people. Medicare pays for 20 days of long-term care, and then you have to go private unless you have a supplement, and that would allow you to have care for the first 100 days paid for, but only if there was a precipitating hospital stay of 3 days prior to going into a facility. So if I've had great care at home and go straight to a facility when I needed an upgrade in attendance, I don't get any Medicare help at all. Zero. So then you could be relying upon VA benefits. The problem with VA benefits, if you're in a VA facility, you get it all taken care of, and the maximum charge would be around $4,500. On the other hand, if you're going to a private facility, because, for instance, if I'm in Richmond, the nearest VA facility is Hazard or Wilmore. Well, my wife may not want to travel that far, so she wants to keep me in a local facility, let's say one of the 4 that are here in Madison County. The VA benefit only delivers $2,800 of cash per month toward that cost. And 28 does not quite reach the $9,200 monthly bill. So it's going to take a lot of private cash out of us. That's why around 68% of all health facilities rely upon Medicaid. It wasn't built into any other insurance that we purchased other than long-term care insurance. And so that's why we rely upon it, just like we rely upon Medicare. We paid into the system. They're exactly the same benefit at the federal level. And so we expected something, and now we don't have a provision to pay for it. So with all that said, that makes pre-planning essential. The sooner you pay, or sorry, not pay, the sooner you plan for this sort of healthcare cost, the legal things that you need to do to prepare for it, the more you're going to be saving. You could be a multimillionaire. If you plan correctly, you would be able to get Medicaid coverage to pay for the long-term care. I'll talk about how to balance that, because someone might say, well, Scott, millionaires shouldn't be relying upon this benefit. There's something to be said for that and something to be said against it. I just want you to think about it with knowledge and not just a reaction. But pre-planning allows you to be able to save. Now, I don't want to get too far ahead, but we're going to talk about an income contribution. As I said, anyone could qualify for the program, but if you have more monthly income than the cost of your care. So for instance, I had a client last part of July. She made $6,000 per month. He made $17,000 per month. Well, his healthcare cost is going to be $9,000. He doesn't get any benefit. He has enough monthly income to pay for the care. Most of the time, when we're planning in this area, the people relying upon Medicaid are those that are income deficient. There's 2 ways to look at that. But we're not talking about people with their assets. Assets, speaking, I'd recommend a strategy of protecting assets and be less concerned if you have plenty of income to meet the need. But when would I be concerned about the income need? I would be concerned about the income need when there is a disproportionate amount of income between spouses. Now, I just mentioned 6,000 and 17,000. Well, imagine for a moment. I'll give a separate example, but we're just talking about that. And with $23,000 a month income, many of us would say, I can't even imagine what that's like. Well, neither can I, but they probably can't imagine what our life is like. But let's say the is something like $5,000 a month. If his income goes away because he predeceases his spouse, on her $6,000 a month, she can't afford the mortgage. Conversely, if she goes into a facility and lose all $6,000 of her income, and so he loses the six, there's still going to be a concern there for mortgage because in the end, we just have to fit within our budget. So if the house is still being mortgaged, there are other large costs like that. And one thing that happened, another client that I remember fondly, he got early onset Alzheimer's. He wasn't even at retirement age. Although it looked as if there was a lot of income and a lot of assets, that really was the business asset, and he had employees that he had to take care of. Medicaid doesn't discriminate or just differentiate on all those things. And all that it's going to allow is $700 toward household expenses, mortgage, insurance, utilities, everything else is not provided for, and the spouse's income is completely lost. So you have to think about the full picture as we're making some choices about these things. So planning is essential to allow yourself to have a plan and to have some flexibility because you don't really know what may happen. And it may not just be the spouse. You may have children, disability strike any generation in the family. And when we all start pulling together and helping, all of the money matters and not just thinking about what am I doing with my retirement money. It helps protect the future, preserving the assets for legacy giving and inheriting, things like that. It does help avoid crisis decisions when things come at us too fast. We tend to not make the best informed decisions. Pre-planning also allows you to remain in control, setting up powers of attorney and making advanced choices about life support and things like that are very, very important. It also allows you to take care of things like children, grandchildren going to college and earmarking money for things like that so that each generation doesn't have to start from scratch, but can build upon what the prior generations have done. And again, are also charitable giving concerns that I think are really important for us to all consider. Sometimes we think, I don't have that much. I can't do that. A $500 gift to charity is often as important as a $500,000 gift to charity. Every little bit can make a difference when we all pull together and think about it. So, lots of reasons to pre-plan. There are some considerations. If you don't pre-plan, even if you do have some money socked away, the average person at retirement has about $120,000 per married couple in savings. That money's going to go quickly. And if you don't have money socked away for the long-term care, that money could go and you'll no longer have a cushion. And then if you do turn to the Medicaid benefit, you don't have extras that Medicaid doesn't cover, like eyeglasses, dental work. There can be a number of things like typically it wouldn't be pedicure care that is often needed by some, things like that. So a lot of reason to keep a cushion in place. Another thing is most of us have always considered that our home is going to be something we can pass on. This program, Medicaid, if you don't get pre-plan and get help from an attorney, you're going to be forced to sell the home. And that's usually through estate recovery, but it can be on the front end too. I think it also creates a heavier burden on our children. They're all worried about you getting good care. They're trying to take care of perhaps the other, are still at home, and now they've got a very, very busy schedule coming to a facility, going to visit mom or dad, the other spouse. And it's just a difficult time because they're also probably having their children that are now either in college or at childbearing age, and they're wanting to see grandbabies and things like that. So lots of considerations here. Without a plan, it can be devastating. One last thing, we kind of set up for a really dangerous thing here because we love and care for each other. We often say, I'm going to take care of my spouse as long as I can in our own home. That's wonderful and beautiful, but there is something to take into consideration. And that is when you have a spousal caregiver, 60% of the time, the spousal caregiver declines quicker than the one that is receiving the care because it is such a difficult job. There's heavy lifting, there's constant stress of uh, psychological with the kind of way we repeat when we're dealing with dementia and Alzheimer's, but there's also just the stress of constantly trying to clean up and maintain good meal structures and doctor's appointments, which become very, very frequent. And it's just a hard job and it takes its toll. So pre-planning helps us build a network to support us instead of going into seclusion and trying to do everything ourselves. Important concern that I see all too often where it just doesn't work as smoothly as we think it should. So the basics about Medicaid is number one, only in Kentucky will it, sorry, I should say it differently. In Kentucky, it will only pay for nursing facilities or in-home care. It will not take care of assisted living. Indiana does, Kentucky doesn't. So a very big concern. It does require an income contribution. One of the things that maybe 30% of the time people will come in and be confused. Why do I not get to keep my income? They're going to pay for my healthcare needs. Surely I get my income. Well, the rule is simple. You get to keep $60 of your personal income. All of your other money must go to your own care. Whatever your monthly income amount is, you get a $60 allowance. You do get to keep enough to continue to pay any Medicare or Medicare supplement premiums, and then everything else must go to the facility. The assets really are what we want to start looking at, and I'll work you through some things on that in just a minute. Another part of all of this is there are two rules. There's one rule that about your assets, let's say the money in savings, the house, whatever you give away will result in a penalty. All that happens is Medicaid takes the financial value of whatever was gifted and they convert it into a time that you will be declared ineligible. Let's say I had a truck that was worth $27,000 and I gave it away to my grandson. That gets divided by what they call a penalty divisor, which is a little over $9,000. So 27 divided by 9,000 gives me a 3-month penalty where Medicaid won't pay, and I have to find another means to do that. And the only way that penalty begins to even be unwound is you have to apply and become denied. You can't just wait 3 months to apply. You have to apply first, get 3 months of denial, then apply a second time. And it is a major process to go through. And that applies anytime during the 5-year look back. So what does that mean? The 5-year look back is at the moment I need care and I make the application, Medicaid asks the question, have you given anything away for less than fair market value in the last 5 years? And if so, then that's how they're going to do this penalty calculation. A lot of times people, they see this coming, it's too late, so they scramble and they give something away a year or two in advance. Most of the time it's the house. Please don't ever do that. Let's just work through a problem here for a second. Let's say I've got a house. My house is worth 270,000. I'm using that number because it's easily divisible by 9,000 per month. If I give away my house at $270,000 to my children who are going to inherit it anyway, I will get a 30-month penalty. Well, if I'm hoping to make the 5-year look back, so I wouldn't be penalized at all. But if I don't make the 5 years, then I'm in trouble. But here's the worst thing about it. my $290,000 home I probably bought when it was about $150,000 purchase price. And because I gave it away, I also gave away my capital gains exclusion. So the value increase from 150 to 270, that $120,000 is going to result, that's my gain. Then I'm going to be taxed at that 270 times the tax gain rate of 15%. So 120,000. I'm going to pay $18,000 worth of taxes on that would otherwise have been taxed at zero. So it's not a good strategy. You're going to lose that way no matter what. There are better ways to do it. Now, here's what most people do. Is if Scott, well, I'll do it sooner rather than later, got the capital gain. The mistake could happen and I don't make a full 5 years. All that's fine. But they still rush to do some sort of do-it-yourself method. If you were to do it, what they're essentially doing in their mind is they're saying, well, something is better than nothing. I've to do something now, or it's too late to do anything at all. And so they just throw in the towel. Here's one of the mottos or slogans I use with everyone. It is never, ever too late. I can always save the house, no matter what. And most of the time avoid any penalty and the taxes as well. Not always, but there's always a way. It's never too late, but you got to get legal help to do it. So those are the basics. Let's talk about a couple of other things. You do get the option in Kentucky for in-home care. You could have unlimited in-home care and you get to avoid the income contribution. Remember I said you only get to keep $60? If it's in-home care, you can have unlimited care as long as you're still mobile, and you get to keep up to $2,400 of the individual's income who is receiving the care. So that's a really good option for us. Now, there are, you have to have certain healthcare needs. You have to have at least two what are called activities of daily living that you need assistance with. Once you meet that level of care, then you just simply start looking at the income. If you have income under 2901, you automatically qualify on the income side. If you have income over $2,901, then you're going to need a qualified income trust. The assets, you would need a different type of trust for, but using a trust alone doesn't qualify you for Medicaid. What has to happen is you have to do additional planning to make the money change character. That make a whole lot of sense until we get deeper into it, and you can see that in the upcoming webinars. I do two more where I'll go deeper on these things about the penalty periods and the look back and the method to solve the problems. And you're going to get notices for those things coming up over the next 3 to 4 weeks. So the income, let's talk about it for a second. The income standard is very simple. If I have income of $2,901 or less, no problem. But what if I have more than that? What if I have $3,000? Some people get afraid and they say, I'll make too much to qualify. That's not true. Federal law says there's a workaround. If I have $3,000, I just have to split my income where I have 2,901 goes into the regular personal checking account the way it always did. And I take the surplus, the additional 99, and I have to create a qualifying income trust, a QIT, or sometimes they're referred to as Miller trusts. Open a new account, and each month I just make that $99 deposit into that account. Now, all that is a pass-through account. So I put the $99 in there, and then immediately I write a check over to the nursing facility or the care agency that's doing the in-home care. And I go back to zero every single month. Wash, rinse, repeat. As long as I'm doing that, I can qualify for the Medicaid long-term care benefit, regardless of how much income I have. So you can see there is no reason why income creates the problem. It is always the assets. So with that said, I'll leave us with bated breath until next time about the assets. There's all kinds of things that we need to dive into about the asset standard. So before we get there, is the $2,901 monthly income a per person limit or is it a couple? It is 2901 is the income limit for the person needing the care. Medicaid looks at married couples jointly in about half of their calculation, and then they look at you individually in another half of the calculation. So what they're doing right there is looking at the person needing care, what is their income? So the example I gave on the slide just a moment ago, if I had $3,000 income, my spouse had another $3,000 income. My spouse, who's going to continue living at home, keeps all of her income, all $3,000. My 3,000, I have to create the QIT, funnel $99 over. I get to pay my Medicare premium and keep $60. So let's say I have a Medicare supplement. That means I'm going to pay $2,940 to the nursing facility, and Medicaid is going to pay the balance, the other um, roughly $6,050. Now, that's still a huge blessing. Medicaid is paying $6,000 of monthly cost that I didn't have to pay. The problem is, my wife has got 3,000 income. I've got 3,000 income. What just happened is the household income got cut in half, and my wife no longer has all of that I was contributing for her needs. Now, hopefully, we don't have a lot of overhead bills, but you could still have, most of us are going to keep a car payment throughout our life. We have a house and other things like that. And I don't know about you, but my insurance can be expensive. Um, Self bills, things like that are not taken into account. So there is just a lot of need, and you can think of could be impacted. How much I give to the church, what I spend on Christmas gifts for grandchildren. Do I get to travel the way I wanted to? All of those things are impacted because the income is cut in half. We are here to help you, and I want you to have as much information as you possibly can get. So, thank you for being here tonight on a Tuesday night. I really do appreciate it. And I hope I get to see you again sometime soon. Hope you be safe, take care of yourselves, and we'll see you soon.